Welcome to SIP episode 113, a slight deviation from the traditional programs. Tonight, we talk about the health benefits of wine, namely resveratrol, the French paradox, and everything that involves how wine can be healthy. And we do it with Jeff Bost, a physician assistant to neurosurgeon, Dr. Joseph Maroon. Don't know the name Maroon? If you've ever watched an NFL football game and watched the concussion protocol that is put in place, that's Dr. Maroon. Tonight, the health benefits of wine with Jeff Bost, SIP episode 113. Ladies and gentlemen, this is a very good episode for you to be joining SIP. This is SIP episode 113. It's our first health and wellness. My name is Martin Cody, co-founder of Cellar Angels, a wine company we started in 2010, almost 13 years ago, really with the mission to change the wine world or to change the world with wine. And if you were paying attention to the news last week in San Francisco, the FBI and the IRS raided the Southern Wine and Spirits Distribution Center and corporate offices in San Francisco. Now, I'm not going to say the distributor was doing anything illegal, and I'm not going to not say it either. So you can draw your own conclusion there. But buying wine direct from these limited production wineries is what it's all about. And tonight is no exception. But tonight we have the opportunity to learn a little bit about wine. And I've grown accustomed to asking myself two questions now when people start pouting off facts and hyperbole, and I heard this on such and such. The first two questions I ask them all the time are, is it true? How do you know? And tonight, when it comes to health and wellness, we're going to talk about some wine facts, some wine health related tips, and really with someone who is an expert in this field. But before I go to Jeff, I'm going to share with you a couple different things. As you can see, dermatology procedures that I had have all cleared up, and you guys are outstanding. Thank you for all of the letters, all of the phone calls and messages, and really the vote of get well. Okay, not a single phone call, not a single phone call from the switchboard operator. So by the way, the season is coming up where there's lists being made. So which list are you going to be on? The naughty or nice list? That's fine. But all good on the dermatology appointment. I do want to show you one thing as it relates to how we're here tonight. If any of you got to meet this gentleman, Paul Maroon, you know what a gregarious figure he was. Paul Maroon of Maroon Winery, he is the one that introduced us to his brother, Dr. Joseph Maroon. Donna, I see your hand is raised. We'll get to that in a second. Paul's winery is right outside of downtown Napa, right next to the country club. It's literally 6 minutes from downtown Napa. Excellent winery. But as you can see by that face right there alone, Paul's a bit of a character. And so Paul introduced me to Joe Maroon, same last name. Paul told me it was his brother, not his brother. It is his brother from a different mother. But this evening, we're going to talk to a very, very important person as it relates to Joe Maroon, the neurosurgeon and spine expert. And that, ladies and gentlemen, is his PA, Jeff Bost. And Jeff, I would love for you to turn on your camera while I actually read to folks a little bit about who Jeff is. Mark, nice to see you. Jeff graduated in 1983 with a BS from Allegheny. Received his physician assistant degree in 1985. He began working with Dr. Maroon in 1987 at Tri-State Neurosurgical Associates at Allegheny Hospital. In 1999, he and Tri-State moved to UPMC. I know UPMC because of my healthcare job. They're a customer of one of our customers. 32 years, his duties have been including clinical patient care, surgical assistant, study coordinator, and research department at UPMC. And since 2019, Jeff has basically worked exclusively as a researcher and writer for neurosurgeon and colleague, Dr. Joseph Maroon. Now, a little bit about Joseph Maroon. Has anybody here ever run a triathlon or run a marathon? Dr. Maroon, I think, has run 9 of them. So he's also the person when you watch the NFL football games and someone has a major head hit and they do a concussion protocol. That's Dr. Maroon. He is the one that instituted the concussion protocol for the NFL, for the NHL, for essentially every single college, university, high school. He is an expert in neurochemistry, health and wellness, and Jeff has worked alongside him he doesn't want to count the years, but it has been a while. And his knowledge, his skill, his wisdom is something that we should all exalt and cherish. And tonight he's going to make us wiser all about the health benefits of wine. So Jeff, very long introduction. Thank you so much for joining us this evening. Cheers.
Cheers. Thank you all. Thank you all for being here. And Martin, thank you for the introduction. One couple corrections though. One, Dr. Maroon's run 9 championship Ironman in Kona, Hawaii. He has done many other Ironman races all over the world, including Australia, Canada, Austria. And I'm the Iron fan. I get to go to all the Ironmans around the country and the world. So I've been very fortunate. As Martin said, I've worked with Dr. Maroon basically all my career, which is very fortunate for me. We've worked side by side, as he mentioned, at Allegheny General Hospital in Pittsburgh, and then moved to UPMC in 1990. And it's been an unbelievable career. I've had very fortunate to work with him with the Pittsburgh Steelers and many other athletes for concussion and head injury problems. And I have sort of a story to tell that we both often tell, as far as how did a neurosurgeon or a neurosurgical physician assistant get from the field of neurosurgery and concussion and all the things that we do relative to that to someone who's talking about health and wellness and red wine and the benefits of the different chemicals that are in red wine. So it's a little bit of a story. If you care to come along, we'll tell a little bit of a story, and hopefully you'll learn something along the way.
Please.
So I'm going to throw my screen out if that's okay.
It is. Oh, and I will get to last week's quiz winners.
So this is sort of some of the things, as Martin said, we are not operating them anymore. At this point, we're still in the Department of Neurosurgery. I still do clinical medical research. One of the consultant things that we've got involved in, primarily through our relationship to concussion and head injury, is Dr. Maroon is the medical director of the WWE, and I'm the assistant medical director of the WWE. And those are those folks that wrestle a lot. And since we got involved about 18 years ago, you may notice that they're not hitting each other with chairs in the head. That was the first thing that we told them that they couldn't do. And I'm also an advisor to St. Barnabas Health System. And more recently, over the last year or so, Dr. Maroon and I now are radio celebrities. We've developed a radio show called Living Well, and it broadcasts weekly in the Pittsburgh area. So I'm going to go ahead and start here. So this is, as I said, our day job for many, many years. I'm the tall guy there, and Dr. Maroon's not. He always wanted me he always wanted to dig a hole in the operating room floor for me to stand in, instead of him standing up on 3 step stools, but that just didn't work. I'm about 6'4" and he's about 5'4", so we've always had our little difference there, but we've both been able to work well together over the years. But this was what we did for many, many years, is we took care of a lot of people with back and brain problems. And along the way, we sort of turned right instead of left, meaning we sort of changed our gears. And I'll talk about health and wellness and how we really got interested in it. But basically, every day we saw people that needed something done with their spine relative to some chronic problem, generally arthritis. And that was generally related to deconditioning, not walking, obesity, sitting too much, mostly lifestyle related problems. Some were related to work-related lifting problems, but the majority of it were just not taking care of themselves, things they could have done in what we call prevention, so preventive medicine. And we really began to get frustrated. We saw these patients every day, and believe me, we had a very busy practice. If we decided to operate on every one that we saw, we'd have 10 hospitals going day and night. So the idea of people needing surgery and having disabled back pain, it's the number 2 reason that a person goes to see a doctor is back pain. So it really was overwhelming. And we said there has to be something more. And we came across prevention. Dr. Maroon also came across the society called the A4M. It's the Anti-Aging Society. And became vice president of that. And I also joined the organization and had an administrative role over the years. So we sort of learned about alternative medicine, wellness medicine. And we originally got started on fish oil, which I'll talk about, the natural anti-inflammatory. We wrote a book on it. But the long and short of it, the reason I'm here tonight is this book that we wrote a number of years ago in 2008, published by Simon & Schuster, called The Longevity Factor: How Resveratrol and Red Wine Activate Genes for a Longer and Healthier Life. So as you can see there, the word red wine is in that, so that should pique your interest. You might have heard of resveratrol before, but you may not know much about what it does. So we're going to have a first discussion about resveratrol, how we found out about it, the benefits, and ended up writing a book about it.
Hey, Jeff, let me pause right there for a quick second, because I think for the audience, at least from my experience, the first time I've ever heard of the word resveratrol was probably the early 90s, 1991 or 92, I think, with the 60 Minutes episode on the French paradox. And they highlighted red wine consumption, and everybody, please comment in the chat or nod. Well, technically you don't nod, but I'd be curious, when did it become mainstream for you and Dr. Maroon to have you kind of want to pursue a book on red wine and resveratrol?
Well, we were probably one of the few persons that never saw that episode. I do know about it subsequently, but definitely it brought a lot of attention at the time. And it was in the early 90s as well. And it corresponded with some scientists who actually discovered resveratrol and did studies and animal studies on that. And his name is David Sinclair. So the story that I'm going to tell talks about the scientist who actually was the man behind the research that talked about resveratrol that ended up being on 60 Minutes. This is another. Okay. Yeah, this is another book we wrote on cocoa, chocolate, if you will, with a fellow by the name of Chris Killam, who was the medicine hunter, went all over the Amazon looking for new plant-based molecules for pharmaceuticals. And chocolate, cacao or cocoa, has a high amount of resveratrol as well as other flavonols and healthy polyphenols.
And for those of you paying attention at home, that's two of our favorite foods so far this evening: wine and chocolate. Please continue.
That's why you pair them. That's exactly right. And as I said in the introduction, probably the entree of us into the world of health and wellness was fish oil. Our body, most people, about 90% of Americans, are deplete or have lower levels of omega-3 than they should. Omega-3 is a natural anti-inflammatory. I can't tell you the number of people that we've taken off anti-inflammatories, told them to take high-dose fish oil, and their pain went away. So we really dug our heels into this and provided it to all our patients. Matter of fact, stopped writing prescriptions for anti-inflammatories because of the side effects. 16,000 people a year die in the United States from anti-inflammatories, primarily from bleeding ulcers. There's about 100,000 that are hospitalized. I remember one time Dr. Maroon and I were about ready to operate on a patient who had a herniated disc, and we walked in and he lifted up his shirt and he had an incision from his sternum all the way down to his pubis, which is probably for him about 2 feet long. And we said, "What happened?" He said, "Well, before I had saw you, I had severe back pain and I was taking Motrin like candy, developed an ulcer, bleeding ulcer, required emergency surgery to stop the bleeding to save his life." And he said, "Boy, am I glad to have this surgery done." So it really can have life-threatening problems as far as medication as far as anti-inflammatory. So this was really our hook to it. Also, our brain cells require omega-3. Omega-3 is one of 2 fatty acids that make up the cell membranes of our brain. And again, most people do not eat or consume enough omega-3 to replace that's naturally lost in the brain. That's why it's essential, for example, for women who are pregnant, that their infants be provided extra omega-3. So it's really something that we've sort of hooked our boat to as far as how we got into wellness. And really the epiphany we had was the idea of trying to fix the car or excuse me, trying not to fix the car that comes in that's broken. So we saw a lot of broken people that came in that were already like the shape of that truck, the yellow truck on your screen there. And we'd rather people prevent those problems. They can get older, but what can we do to prevent them? So if you see in the green truck below, it had a new paint job. The engine was overhauled. Doing things to keep yourself running rather than running out of things to pills to take or surgeries to take, and before you know it, you're disabled. The vast majority of Americans are living longer, but they're not living healthier. So I don't know if you can read this or not. This is a comic. I'm willing to make some lifestyle changes as long as I don't have to do anything different. And this has really been, and I say been because fortunately things are changing, the idea, well, just pop a pill. There's, I don't have to do anything. I don't have to get up. I can sit for hours at a time. There might be something that I can just take and that'll be it. I just don't want to do anything to get better. But in fact, the vast majority of our healthcare dollar, which is now going to be about $4.1 trillion, trillion with a T, the vast majority of it goes, as you can see on this pie diagram here, hospital care, physician services, but less than 1% is spent on preventing disease. So we really have the bang for our buck is upside down. The bang for our buck is to spend on preventing illness and disease and doing lifestyle changes to prevent that, rather than spending things when we're already sick. So basically our healthcare system is a sick care system. Yep. And really, this sort of tells it all. An ounce of prevention was worth a pound of cure, but that was before Medicare. So we think of all of our insurance companies and all these hospitals as sort of our safety net. We don't have to do anything to prevent illness. It's going to be paid for. There's nothing well, not for everybody, of course, but there's nothing we really have to do. And this is a mindset that you really have to guard against. And I hope, like I said, hopefully Americans are now starting to realize that.
Yeah, it's interesting. I mean, one of the statistics that threw me for a loop years ago, and by the way, I think most of the audience knows both Mission Control and I, our day jobs are in healthcare, or hers is now running the ship of Cellar Angels. We met at a nursing conference years ago. But one of the things, Jeff, that I heard that alarmed me was that 90% of an individual's total healthcare spend throughout their life comes in the first 5 years of their life and the last 5 years of their life. Yeah. So when you think about longevity and living longer, well, that's fine if you're living longer, but if the last 5 or 10 years of your life is utterly miserable and you're in a nursing home, what's the benefit of living longer? Well,
there's no benefit. Dr. Maroon's saying is, I want to die young as late as possible.
Yes.
So the idea of the model, our current model on your left shows healthcare and a precipitous drop in health over years as we just get worse and worse. And then finally, as you mentioned, last 5 years, we spend up all of our money and die. The model on the right is the one we're promoting, where our health actually stays on a plateau or even perhaps gets better. And then we precipitously drop off. We don't have years and decades of disability, requiring intensive hospital care like nursing homes and things like that. And how do we get about doing that? We prevent the chronic illnesses that occur with aging. And it's quite frankly, the only way to do that is through lifestyle changes and the things we put in our mouth and the exercise we do and so on. So this is the model that we sort of adhere to and want to promote. So now we're going to talk about how we did hear about the idea of resveratrol. Resveratrol came to us with what should I say, sort of from the horse's mouth. There were two researchers from Harvard, Joseph Barr and David Sinclair. David Sinclair was a senior author who in 2006 wrote an article regarding mice. And this was the title: Resveratrol mimics a low-calorie diet, increases survival in mice. Now, for you who are not PhD physiologists or biochemists, this may not seem all too shocking, but when we read through it and read, actually at the time it got a lot of press. It really is a life-changing, life-altering observation in their case. So what did they actually do and what did they describe? So this may seem like a technical slide, but it's really not. The first graph on the left is weight. The one in the middle is lifespan, and the bottom one is exercise endurance. And basically, they had three different cohorts of mice. One ate a standard diet, one ate a high-calorie diet, and the last ate a high-calorie diet was resveratrol. And as you can see in the first graph on the left, the mice that had a high-calorie diet and resveratrol gained weight, just like the other one on the high-calorie diet. So there's no mystery quite there as far as what happened. They ate more food and they gained weight, both the mice that took resveratrol and the mice that didn't. But as we see in the next graph where it says lifespan, that the mice that were given resveratrol and unrestricted food, so the heavier mice now that are giving, became heavier, but were given resveratrol, actually lived longer and lived about the same span as a mouse who didn't have a high calorie diet. When we say high calorie diet, we're saying a high calorie diet mimics a lot of the things that humans do that precipitate dying young. So things like the early onset of diabetes, heart disease, elevated cholesterol, all the things that can happen to us also happen in mice when they have a high calorie diet. So resveratrol was able to preserve their lifespan in a similar way as a standard diet mouse. And then in the third slide, this is also kind of interesting. The resveratrol mice that had the unrestricted diet actually were able to maintain exercise for many months, similar to the same degree as the standard diet. So you can see the middle one, the HC, in the third graphic down, the heavier mice actually started to fade as far as exercising on the circle, the wheel circle. So this is something was going on. They were living longer. They appeared to have better muscle tone, better endurance. And this is what Dr. Sinclair and Barr wrote about. And it was all generally because they tied it back to resveratrol. So not only did they do observational studies, they did biochemical studies. What was going on in the blood of these mice that had the resveratrol? So what they discovered is the resveratrol mimicked a low-calorie diet and increased the survival in mice. And I don't know if any of you have heard of the health benefits of a low-calorie diet, fasting, intermittent fasting. I think it's become more and more popular, but the idea that actually just holding back eating for periods of time has significant health benefits. And
Oh, phew.
Pardon me?
I said, oh, phew, because I was going to let you know or ask a question. Say a person stops eating at 8 and doesn't eat again until noon. Is that health beneficial? Asking for a friend.
Yes, absolutely. Because what happens is basically we're mimicking how we were. And one of the things I didn't mention was Dr. Sinclair was also an evolutionary biologist. So that means he had studied evolution, and he understood, as we understand, that the early man on the savannah didn't have a McDonald's at every corner. There weren't any refrigeration. They would eat when they had a kill, and they would stuff themselves full, but maybe a week, 2 weeks, 3 weeks later before they could eat again. So there are periods of feast and famine.
Yep.
And during
Now,
that period,
hold that thought right there on diet, because it actually brings up a poll question. And by the way, you can answer this, Jeff, but I'm going to hold your answer until the end because this is for the audience. So speaking of wine and health and food and inflammation that we're talking about, which is the most inflammation causing food? 32-ounce soft drink at the movie theater with a large box of Good and Plenty's. That dates me, I'm sure, because I'm not certain if they still serve Good and Plenty's at the movie theater. A Philly cheesesteak. Yeah, Mission Control. What's a movie theater? Philly cheesesteak, Chicago-style Polish sausage, a week's worth of bologna sandwiches on white Wonder Bread with mayo. And by the way, Jeff, as a product of the 70s and 80s, all of this was standard diet consumed food for me growing up. Didn't even know there was anything other than Wonder Bread until probably senior year in high school.
okay.
Thank you, Mom and Dad. So I'll give 10 more seconds. 7, 6, 5, 4, 3. Now I chose Philly cheesesteak because I'm sure Jeff, coming from Pennsylvania, is an expert on Philly cheesesteak nutritional value, and I'm sure it's a short conversation. 3, 2, 1. All right. So which is the most inflammation causing food? Here's what the results indicate. Here's what the audience thinks. And Jeff, I chose these things because obviously of the refined wheat in the buns of the sandwiches, the unyet discoverable items that are in a Chicago Polish style sausage in some sort of a synthetic casing, and also Wonder Bread, which has a shelf life measured in years. So which of these digestively would cause the most inflammation?
Well, I think they're all possible. If the soft drink is a non-diet, I think that would give you plenty of sugar to cause inflammation. I think you stacked the deck when you said a week's worth of bologna, because I mean, there's nothing other than, I mean, nothing has a similar volume as far as food for a week listed here. But I was tossed between the Chicago style Polish sausage and the bologna sandwiches because of the processed meats. Processed meats specifically have been pointed out like smoking has been demonized for causing many problems, early dementias, lung problems, and so on. Processed meats really have been found to have a significant effect on longevity, cancer, and cancer is related to inflammation as well. So bologna is certainly a processed meat, but I think either of those could be, if you took the volume of a week's worth away, if you just said bologna sandwich or the processed meat found in this Polish sausage, I'd say they both have the potential to cause significant inflammation.
Yeah, and it's funny, when I look at the diet that I had as a child growing up, I mean, it was Carl Budding, it was Oscar Mayer bologna, it was all of those things that were processed meats. And it's amazing what that was doing. Granted, there's a huge convenience factor as a mom, in a household of 8 or something like that, going grocery shopping. But boy, it could be causing a lot of long-term paleness. And Peter has a question to us. What about cured meats, those from Spain and Italy?
I think those are I lump them all together. I think to a large degree, high salt curing is done with salt as well. I think there's other additional chemicals that are put in processed meat, but I think the high salt of curing maybe is not quite as bad, but it certainly can cause problems.
Got it. All right, so back to resveratrol and the lovely mice.
Yeah, so it seems like it's all complicated, but it really isn't. The fact is that we've known about calorie restriction and the benefits to health for a long time, but no one really wants to calorie restrict. Have you ever tried it? Actually, Dr. Maroon tried it for about a week, and he was the most grumpy neurosurgeon you ever want to meet. So it's really hard to do. Skipping meals or one time at one day and then eating the next is something that a lot of people can do. Going for long periods of time of fasting throughout a day you can do, but the type of calorie restriction that he did was definitely not healthy for anybody, including his colleagues. But the bottom line is a pill, and I say a pill, resveratrol can become a pill, a powder, a elixir, however you want to say it, or as we're going to discuss later, found in red wine, had mimicked the benefits of calorie restriction. And I'll go over what those are, but in the bottom bullet there, you see it produces changes associated with longer lifespan, increasing the insulin sensitivity factor. And as we know, as we age, the insulin sensitivity factor diminishes, which means you need more and more insulin, and that precipitates over time diabetes, especially if you're on a high carbohydrate diet. So all these things seem to be leaning towards the idea that this natural chemical, polyphenol found in plants could benefit humans. So let's see here. So this is the picture of Dr. St. Clair and Dr. Maroon. So Dr. Maroon read this, he showed it to me, and we became, he basically set us out on a journey to learn about resveratrol that ultimately resulted in that book that you saw at the beginning, The Longevity Factor. And I'm going to review exactly what calorie restriction is. So I'm going to give, we've already given the answer, but the question is, what has been shown to consistently reduce cardiovascular disease, cancer, neurodegenerative disease in the brain in both humans and animals? And the answer is calorie restriction. So we know about calorie restriction all the way back since the 30s, when a PhD researcher by the name of McKay and his team discovered in rats that the greater the calorie restriction, the fewer calories that they had, the longer they lived. In fact, the rats with the least food lived 40% longer, which, as you can see on the right, is about equivalent to 40 extra years as a human. And this has also been seen in almost every animal that it's been tested. There's been a long-term study actually in rhesus monkeys that is still going on for decades now. The one thing is it can't be done in humans. And the reason for that is the researchers would probably die before they got the results. So we are not doing that type study in humans, but every animal model so far has shown that. So what are some of the changes that happens when you reduce your calorie? Well, as I said earlier, this is a evolutionarily developed protection mechanism, because we lived in the savannah, there was food, there was feasting, and there was famine. So we had to survive during that time of famine. So when there wasn't any food source, our body reacted to that stress, and we actually changed. We changed how our metabolism worked. We changed our aging process. We even changed our reproduction. It slowed our aging, it delayed reproduction, because you don't want to reproduce as a species while there's no food. So really, the idea of scarcity and stress actually changed our metabolism. So the hypothesis, a low-calorie restriction is a stressful condition. It provokes a primitive universal survival response to survive this adversity. Physiologically, it alters metabolism and increases our defenses, and it happens to be against aging. Now, typically the caveman or early man did not worry about or did not consider living to his 60s, 70s, 80s, 90s, etc. But it allowed that species to survive and allowed us to be here today as humans. This is a complex slide, but basically it shows that starvation has effects on many different metabolic pathways within our body, and a lot of them result in anti-cancer, and they reduce inflammation and increase longevity. So how does this all happen? Well, David Sinclair and his team and others around the world discovered a set of genes called the Sirtuin genes. And that may ring a bell to some of you who knew about or know about resveratrol. Certain genes called Sirtuin genes are a class of enzymes that underlie the process of how calorie restriction works. So it's evolved in our species, it's evolved in every animal to sort of combat that time when we're under tremendous stress, like when we're calorie restricted. So once activated, these genes can delay cell death, promote cellular repair and damage, improve mitochondrial function. And I want to take you back to Dr. Sinclair's study with the mice on the treadmill, or on the wheel rather. If you recall, those that took resveratrol had increased stamina despite their age, but the only thing different was they were taking resveratrol. And what they found is they actually, and we're going to get a little bit in the nitty gritty here, but they actually did muscle biopsies on those mice and found they had more mitochondria per whatever centimeter or millimeter square than the control mice. So in fact, the mitochondria biogenesis, which is just a fancy term for new mitochondria, develop more and more mitochondria to make those muscles fire more and last longer. In addition, once activated, the Sirtuin genes slow brain cell deterioration, degeneration, and they also reduce cancer cell formation. And the big thing with the brain function is they reduce blood vessel narrowing. What happens to people when they get older? They get atherosclerosis, or narrowing of the blood vessels. It's one of the major causes for dementia and heart disease and peripheral vascular disease. By not dilating, or excuse me, by not narrowing our blood vessels, that healthy blood that brings all the nutrients can flow better to the brain and the heart and everywhere in the body. So this is one of the things that Sirtuin does. So the concept here is that, and I already told you the answer, that can anything else activate Sirtuin genes and improve longevity besides calorie restriction? And of course, the answer is found in plants. Plants and animals are linked together. So the plant source of resveratrol, one of the plant sources of resveratrol, are the skins of red grapes. So resveratrol is a plant, we consume it, and it provides us resveratrol, which activates the Sirtuin genes, which activates our ability to perhaps live longer. And that's really what David Sinclair was finding out in his mice. And as I said, it's not going to be tested on humans because we can't devise a study to have the researchers live long enough to test, but there are other studies that are being done relative to cancer prevention, diabetes prevention, heart disease, and so on.
Hey, Jeff, quick question from Debbie, and it's a great question as it relates to the reversal of things. I mean, you talked early on about getting off some of the drugs and just going straight to omega-3s and fish oil. Can resveratrol actually reverse and or stop the existence of plaque in arteries?
Well, I think what we are, where we're at today, this is sort of a historical story I'm telling. Where we're at today with resveratrol is the dosage of resveratrol. Many of these animal-based studies, and also some of the human studies, are done on resveratrol up to 1 gram, so 1,000 milligrams a day. Right now, that's generally considered cost prohibitive in the general population. Now, resveratrol has now been synthesized. It can be obtained organically through manipulation of carbon molecules, but it's still very expensive to take in 1,000 milligrams or more dosing. So researchers are looking at whether or not there will be a dose that can stop atherosclerosis, stop Alzheimer's disease, but right now we don't know the dose. But I'll tell you a little bit about something about red wine here shortly on that, in that it may actually hold some of the answers to how to obtain resveratrol, because resveratrol consumed as pure resveratrol, whether synthetic or from a plant source, if it's an isolated resveratrol molecule, is poorly absorbed versus resveratrol that's found in wine and other natural resveratrol containing products. Because of the other polyphenols help it absorb into the body and reduce its breakdown. So this is one of the things we're finding with wine or other sources of resveratrol, that it actually can cause a higher level of resveratrol in the blood than the pure resveratrol, which breaks down very quickly. And this slide here just says other animals have been tested. So this is just a summary, as I already went over. Interestingly, in the middle there, you can see it increases aerobic capacity when tested on treadmills. This was a study that Dr. Maroon and I did with 100 participants, and found that those who were on resveratrol actually had increased stamina, strength, and oxygen capacity while on resveratrol. We published this a number of years ago. But the bottom line says there, no adverse effects. So we've not seen, even in high doses, 1 gram or more, of any side effects related to resveratrol.
Before you go on from that, question that talks about the resveratrol health benefit seems in conflict with the CDC guidance to avoid limit alcohol, including wine, to prevent cancer. Now, I know we're not specifically talking cancer.
Yeah.
So curious what your thoughts are on that.
I'm gonna jump ahead that because you asked me that before, and I did have a response here. This is Dr. Maroon and I in 2000. I can't see the top. What is it? 7. When we went to the Morning Peninsula of Australia to visit some wineries there, and I'm just going to throw out a quick comment about this. We went there because what's happening in the southern hemisphere above Antarctica, actually it's getting better, but it's been pretty bad. And I'll answer the own question. It's the loss of the ozone layer, which means UV radiation is affecting these southern parts of Australia and the wine that is grown there and the grapes that are grown there tremendously. So there's a concept called Xenohomesis. So everybody write that down, say it 3 times, Xenohomesis, and explains how stress in the environment can make the plant stronger. And also that when an animal eats that, the animal can become stronger. So this is really the theory or the story behind resveratrol and the idea of stress. So in the Morning Peninsula, the grapes are exposed to tremendous amounts of UV radiation. Just so happens those same grapes have extremely high amounts of resveratrol because of that stress. And so when we went there, we were looking for high dose resveratrol containing wine, and we certainly found it in the 3 days that we were in Australia. We slept some of the time, of course, but it was quite an experience. But this is a term called Xenohomesis, where the plant is stressed and that benefits the animal. So these are the things as people who grow wine and grow grapes might be interested in. The grapes exposed to pathogens, pesticides, microbes, even ultrasonic sound, light emitting diodes, ultraviolet radiation, macronutrients, and fungicides. These are all things that stress the plant and actually in a lot of cases can increase the amount of resveratrol. And these are some of the other natural sources of resveratrol. Many of them, are in colorful plants, blueberries and red raspberries, and resveratrol, along with these other polyphenols, make up a lot of the pigment color changes that occur in ripe fruit. So that's where it's found in the skin. And again, the skin is on the outside. It's the protection area of the plant, of the fruit. And so the more radiation, the more fungus, the stronger it reacts to be. And then this is just another plant source called Polygonum cuspitatum, which is a roadside weed, actually. It's also called the Japanese knotweed, and it's also another source of resveratrol. So to get you to your long and short to your answer, Martin, this is what I just read today and yesterday. This was in the news. It was circulating strongly in the news. Deaths from alcohol on the rise for decades, soaring after the pandemic. That was from Forbes. PBS's reported study shows stark number of alcohol-related deaths among young Americans, a spike in middle-aged adults and women. What else are we seeing as well? Adolescent suicides increasing. We're seeing that the nation's drug problem is worsening with increasing overdose. And we also certainly see an increased rate in obesity related to stress, job loss, sedentary lifestyle. So in my opinion, to get back to your question, this is my humble opinion, I think there's a lot of stress in our society, whether it's political, environmental, health-wise, and I think the nation is certainly trying to cope, and they're often, as humans do, cope in the wrong ways. We eat too many carbohydrates, we become obese, we don't exercise, we take drugs, we take alcohol. Is the wine to blame? I mean, wine has been around for thousands of years. I don't think anyone is forcing people to drink it, but there's certainly a risk with wine, alcohol, hard liquor. But is someone who drinks wine for the taste and the enjoyment of it the same person who's trying to get drunk to hide their problems? I think those are two different things. That's my opinion.
Completely agree.
So this is the paradox you talked about in 1991. We heard that 60 Minutes broadcast the show on the French consumption of red wine lowers the rate of heart disease. As a matter of fact, the French who eat about 40% more fat per day from animal sources, so that's the bad fat, 60% more cheese and 3 times as much pork, which is again fatty meat, have a death rate from cardiovascular disease about half of that in America. So this was called the French paradox. The paradox is, of course, They eat a very bad diet, and yet they have half the heart disease of Americans. And a lot of people at that time postulated that it was related to red wine. And so what is red wine? Red wine has alcohol. Alcohol has been found to cause vasodilation, which in moderation is probably a good thing. In severe alcohol, you know what happens. You get what are called dilated blood vessels of the face, which are called telangiectasis. You can see them if you know what you're looking for. You can also get platelet inhibition, which can be a good thing as well. One of the reasons that people have heart attacks and stroke is because blood vessels clot. But if you have too much platelet inhibition, you can bleed very easily. Red wine is full of polyphenols. And this is what I was talking about earlier, this sort of penumbrum effect. All the other polyphenols in wine are not just resveratrol. There's many different kinds. And that sort of cluster of red wine polyphenols are what allows resveratrol to remain active when consumed in a red wine type consumption versus having pure resveratrol. So the French paradox, is it related completely to resveratrol? Well, this speaks to it. Pure resveratrol is rapidly broken down in the liver. Pure resveratrol is very difficult to get higher blood levels of resveratrol when tested versus when you consume red wine and you can test out for resveratrol. You can find even a small intake of 200 milliliters can result to 1 to 10 milliliters in the blood. So it really has a different, it's the vehicle that makes the difference with red wine. And we know that red wine polyphenols with resveratrol included can inhibit the effect of smooth muscle cell constriction, which allows vasodilation. And that is also a benefit related to cardiovascular disease, because you've all heard of hardening the arteries. One of the major reasons for that is this increased amount of muscle that occurs in our blood vessels that reduces the compliance, which means the expansion of blood vessels. And it also has a very powerful antioxidant effect, especially on bad cholesterol. So you've all been probably waiting for this slide. Resveratrol is really overall very rare in our diet. And I'd like to thank all the vintners out there and the people who have made red wine over the decades and centuries, because they're actually doing quite the service in the sense that they're providing a source that's really unheard of in nature by concentrating the skins of red grape into the juice form and allowing it to be very pleasantly drunk. So these are the different wines that we have. There's many more, of course, but these have been tested. And you can see on the far right-hand column, the Pinot Noir has probably the most milligrams per 5-ounce glass. So there are other sources of resveratrol, but wine and natural food products like peanuts, blueberries, raspberries are probably one of the best ways to get it.
Hang on. Hey, Jeff, go back to that slide for a second.
Yeah.
Now, see, this is fascinating as wine people, that Pinot Noir has the most resveratrol because it has the thinnest skin.
Well, I was going to say that, but I was going to let you say that. Yeah, I've not been a vintner. I don't know the whole history of Pinot, but I do know that's exactly true, Martin, that the thinnest skin grape has the really booster its protection from the fungus and the UV radiation, and resveratrol is part of that polyphenol protection.
Interesting. So it's kind of it's boosted its own defense shield within that thin skin to withstand some of, like you mentioned, the external environmental stressors.
Exactly. And again, this is something we don't know. What is the dosage for resveratrol? And this is going to be bannered about for many years. You see supplements now that have resveratrol in it. The vast majority are synthetic-based resveratrol. Is this going to be beneficial? Trans resveratrol versus cis resveratrol is a whole nother story. We just don't know a lot about the dosing, but we do know that when you test somebody's blood after they have a glass of wine, you can find it there. So red wine may still remain the best way to get the proper or a dose that can be helpful. I'm going to skip some of these. It just talks about this is sort of just a summary of all the human research. So a lot of the research I presented earlier is related to animals. Human studies are now coming out showing cancer protection, altering fat stores for energy so that you you may lose weight. I hate to say that because I don't want to be, you mentioned Dr. Oz earlier. I don't want to be a Dr. Oz per se, but it has other benefits: antioxidant, anti-inflammatory, longevity, neuroprotection, and these have all been shown in human studies. Very quickly, how does resveratrol do all this? Well, it's a small molecule activator, which means it's very, very tiny, and it can affect many different biochemical pathways because it's sort of like a master key in a lot of enzymatic reactions. So it's one of the neat things about resveratrol, the molecule itself. It can improve brain flow. It has a huge benefit to vasodilate. So in summary, resveratrol can help improve glucose regulation, mitochondrial function, endothelial, which is the function within inside our blood vessels, antioxidant, anti-inflammatory. These all may eventually prove to improve aging in humans. That should be probably a monkey there or a mouse because we don't really know for sure about a human, but it can improve physical function in animals and also improve cognitive function. So that's sort of the story with resveratrol. I'd be glad to answer any questions. I have other information on different topics, but I think this is quite a bit, and we can move on, or we can take some questions.
Yeah, I would pause there for a second and go ahead and stop sharing. I've got a couple things to share, but if anybody can throw questions in the chat, that's fine. I do believe, Jeff, with regards to, the aging component and the diet and the stressors and the environmental stressors, you talked about some of the stressors on the resveratrol as a plant actually makes the plant stronger. And then things that eat that plant in turn are stronger. How does that work when you look at the agricultural aspect of corn, soybeans, and the United States, when we're making the plants theoretically stronger, but we're using chemicals, we're using fertilizers, we're using, pesticides and stuff like that. What happens when animals eat those plants and then we in turn eat the animals?
Well, I think what's happening is we're forgetting evolution. The things that happen to grape skins and other plants that develop polyphenols happen through the millennium. It just didn't happen because we're throwing some fertilizer on it or a pesticide or whatever. The idea of the biochemical changes take generation and generation. And a lot of these plants are clones that we're looking at now in mass agriculture. They're not really, and they're not fertilized the old fashioned way. So I think that, the idea of could they be altered? Absolutely. I don't think they're being altered. I think they're being altered in a bad way rather than a good way, quite frankly, genetically. But the benefits that we see relative to the development of more polyphenols to protect the skin of the grape took millennium. I mean, it took a lot of failures along the way to have that final strain of grape to be surviving.
And I know, unfortunately, you've got, I'm sure, a ton of slides on fish oil. Is there anything in omega-3s, and I'm a huge proponent of those and take it every single day. Can you talk a little bit about, and Jim Bocce, and by the way, he's called Jim Bocce because he's a ringer at Bocce Ball. So be careful if you ever encounter him. Talk to us a little bit about kind of omega-3s and why they're just so fantastic at inflammation reduction and how to get it. What does it mean for brain health and overall health and well-being?
So omega-3s are an essential part of every cell in our body. So there's a cell membrane and there's organelles within the cells, DNA and mitochondria, you know all about that. But the outer cover of our cell membrane is made up of two different fatty acids, arachidonic acid and polyphenols. And omega-3 is the general recognized fatty acid. I don't know if you remember back to biology, the lipid layer that surrounds our cells. Mm-hmm. So if you have a preponderance of a diet that has a lot of arachidonic acid, which is basically a meat-based diet, then you're you draw from that membrane to make other molecules. So arachidonic acid drawn from the membrane generally can be used to make inflammatory molecules. Not completely, but can be used to make inflammatory molecules. Polyphenols drawn from that membrane generally can be used to make anti-inflammatory molecules. So there's two pathways that come down, the inflammatory pathway and the anti-inflammatory pathway, and they're led by two different fatty acids. So the vast majority of Americans' diet, and pretty much the world now, is an overpreponderance of arachidonic acid. We get it in about everything we eat. But in our diet, because name the most common source of omega-3s in our diet. McDonald's fish sandwich.
Okay.
A McDonald's fish sandwich, however, is cooked at high heat, which denatures or breaks down omega-3 fatty acids. So
and oil.
And the oil, right. So we very rarely get enough omega-3s in our diet. And on omega-3s proportionately, so let's say 20% are omega-3s in most cell membranes, and the other part is 80% arachidonic. In our brain, there's much more percentage of omega-3s. There's probably 40 to 60% omega-3s, because omega-3s allow for fast communication of electricity to go from one cell to the other. That's how the membrane works with more omega-3s. So if you don't have enough omega-3s in a developing brain or an aging brain, as those omega-3s go away or absorbed or used, you become, it's not good for the brain. And it's one of the theories why humans developed the big brain, is because at some point in time in our evolution, they actually were able to get to a good sea source of food, shells, crabs, fish living near the sea.
Interesting.
And actually a very rapid occurrence of brain size, they believe, occurred during that time. So this is proved in population studies, Norwegian studies, other communities and countries that eat more fish oil. They have these better health tendencies related to that versus societies that don't. So it's the preponderance of evidence tells us that omega-3s are essential and have benefits. And for our purposes, we use it as an anti-inflammatory, because as I said, those two pathways, if you have more omega-3s, you're going to get greater anti-inflammatory versus inflammatory. And it works the same in our practice and in our patients as an anti-inflammatory you buy, or get prescription for.
All right, two remaining questions. Omega-3s and krill or versus krill?
Well, there's fish. Krill is from the ocean, so it has omega-3s in it. There's a plant base, hemp, and it has hemp seeds and other plants that have it. So it really, wherever you get the omega-3, you don't want to spend an arm and a leg. Sometimes the krill costs significantly more. So right. I think you want to look at the purity, make sure there's no heavy metals in it. There's a lot of ways that you look for the source of where your omega-3 comes from.
Interesting. And then final question, in addition to omega-3, if you were going to tell someone, here's a key or two keys to longevity, health, and wellness, as it relates to everything we talked about from environmental, strictly speaking from a diet standpoint, what would you tell them beyond omega-3s to eat more of or eat less of? Well,
the sugar, salt, and fat. Basically, those are the three things that society, our advertisers and our food giants know that we love to crave. As you talked earlier about corn syrup, the sweetener found in everything we eat. They go to the senses of our tongue, and they basically have been hijacked by those major companies that put that salt, fat, and sugar in everything we eat. So look at the label. Try to cut those three things out. They're bad for blood pressure. They're bad for your cholesterol, heart disease. About everything that we do and want to live longer and prevent chronic disease are three of the worst products you can eat.
Interesting. I cannot believe how fast this hour went. We didn't get into the deep dive of omega-3s. We didn't even talk about CBD. I still can't pronounce this word, cannabinoids, or what is it? Cannabinoids. Thank you. And so your estimate intake on resveratrol via red wine, is it a bottle a day, 2 bottles? What are you thinking?
Well, the CDC and the Surgeon General recommend no more than 1 glass of wine for women and 2 for men per day.
And by the way, CDC, just so everyone knows, that's Cody, Denise Cody. That's what the CDC stands for. Next week, ladies and gentlemen, on SIP episode 114, we have author and basically wine expert Kathy Hughey. And Kathy is a freelance writer that has contributed to Time, Inc., Nature, Forbes, and she is the author of a book called Hungry for Wine. It is a fantastic little study of 12 different cultures around the world where wine is the predominant thing. And the chapters are amazing, specifically a chapter that I found incredible on Iran, where wine is such an important culture. Their war is going on around them, and they're still in the vineyards cultivating the crop because that's all they've done for centuries upon centuries. So Kathy is going to be our guest next week. She is a wine data savant. She will be with us. For those of you that I know crave Google Earth, yes?
There's 2 questions.
2 questions. Yes, hang on.
1, is there resveratrol in white wine, and why not?
Is there resveratrol in white wine?
Yes.
And if, okay.
Not as much, because it's the grapes that, the sitting with the red grape skins that leach the resveratrol out. So you're not going to really have as much.
Interesting. And what was the other question?
How much is in a glass? I think you covered that.
Yeah, it depends upon the varietal, how much is in a glass, and you do have that slide. Pinot Noir has the most. Doug, who signed in this evening from London, where I have no idea what time it is in London. Thank you, Doug. Good to see you. As I said, next week, next week we're off. 2 weeks we will be with Kathy. Next week, we're going to go pay a lot of money to a mouse in Orlando and take in some of the sites. So everyone, it's 1 a.m. in London. Thank you. Jeff, your wisdom is amazing, and your kindness to share it with us this evening is, we're grateful, and thank you so much for that.
I got a bottle of wine for it, so I'm happy.
We're not above bribes. I mean, I've got the Schweiger as well. I have pictures of Schweiger. I have Google Earth that we are still indebted to, so we can do that. By the way, the Cellar Angels website for all of you, it is getting faster and faster and faster. So I encourage you to take a look at that. Wine Club is coming out November 21st. So if you are not a wine club member, there's a pretty special wine club coming up. There is an election next Tuesday, and we talked about kindness, and we talked about inflammation, and we talked about all of the external environmental factors. And so as we close off every episode of SIP for the last 112, we're going to do it again. Be good to one another, be kind to one another. Thank you so much, Jeff. Thank you all, Cellar Angel Sipsters. You guys be safe. We'll see you in 2 weeks. Cheers.
Thanks, Jeff.
Thank you.